today for showing up and wanting to learn a new skill. I know it can be overwhelming, but we're here to help you. A quick heads up before we begin. If you do not already have a text editor downloaded, go ahead to sublimetext.com, download and install it. So we're part of PTC, an organization that holds conferences, workshops, and panels for anybody who's interested in the world of tech. Check us out on our website or any of our social media. A quick note, if you need any help, we're going to be covering the basics of creating a page on a browser today. A lot of us have possibly done some inspect element on a web page before, and today we're going to hopefully help you decipher what that code actually means. So if you notice that we're going too fast or you need clarification on a concept, please do not hesitate to use the raise hand feature in Zoom in the bottom left corner. You can also private message us on the Project Tech Conferences user in the chat, and they will do your best to get your questions answered. A final note, we will be recording this event, so please keep your video off and keep yourself muted. So we're going to go through our agenda today. We're going to start off by breaking down some techie definitions. Next, we're going to set up our workspace. We're going to have an HTML lesson with a few exercises, a CSS lesson with a few exercises, and finally at the end, we're going to give you some free time to work on your site with help from us if needed. And just a quick note, we will be providing the slides in the chat and the other reference materials that we use throughout this workshop, just so you guys are able to use them as reference.
All right, great. Thanks, Shakula. So first off, we're going to go through a quick rundown of what browsers and web pages are. So web browsers are software applications that we use to visit websites and retrieve information from the World Wide Web. Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and maybe even Internet Explorer are all browsers we use to access web pages, which are different pages on a website on different websites. So let us know in the chat which one you're using right now. What browser are you using? What's really interesting with the websites are that typically they look the same despite accessing them from different browsers, thanks to the use of HTML and CSS. So know that web browsers like Chrome and Firefox and search engines like Google and Bing are not the same thing. Search engines are just websites as well. So we're going to go through what exactly a personal website is. So a personal website is a site that showcases who you are as a person. It tells the person visiting your site about you. People from all different industries use personal portfolios to tell their audience about themselves. And now that many things are digital, we have online portfolios where we can showcase who we are. In the tech industry, in particular, software developers, particularly those who do freelance work, often create portfolio websites for themselves, which showcase their web development skills, but also acts as a sort of online resume. Your job today is going to be to create a web page that will showcase who you are and your skills, like a resume, but online. So on the screen here, we have a few examples of what a personal website could look like. What do we notice these web pages both have? Are there certain things that our eyes tend to focus on? So maybe some of you may have guessed, but both of these web pages have some things in common. Right, so there's the owner's name as the heading, usually in larger and bolder font. And there's a description of the person in smaller font. And yeah, there's the picture of the person, which is a huge part of the web page. And there's also potentially some links to their social media or other pages that they might think are relevant. So these are definitely the things that we might be looking for our web pages during this workshop. Although you are free to take an artistic license and add whatever you feel best reflects you. All right, so before we jump into everything, we're going to define a few terms and concepts. So first off, what exactly is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it was released in the 90s. It isn't a programming language per se. It's a markup language that helps to design documents to display in our browsers. You can think of HTML as the language communicating with a browser that describes the content of the web page you're designing. Files with HTML will end with the extension .html, which helps us differentiate between an HTML file and other files in our computer. Next up, what exactly is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's a style sheet language. This means that it describes how the document should look, so the font, the layout, the colors, and much more. It's important to separate the style and the design of the page with the actual textual content. And in this regard, CSS allows us to specify and make styling templates of sorts for the design blocks of our pages. This way, we can simplify the design of many parts of our web pages. So you might be wondering why we often hear about HTML and CSS together all the time. And it's because they work best to create a visually appealing static website. So HTML is kind of like the skeleton of your website, and this is basically the content. And CSS, on the other hand, is responsible for the styling. It attaches properties like fonts and colors and spacing to the skeleton of the site. So you'll also hear about some programming languages like JavaScript thrown into the mix. And JavaScript allows us to kind of describe behavior and create interactive web pages and web applications. We're not going to go into JavaScript today, but you can look it up on your own time. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are basically the three core technologies that are used to make up the World Wide Web. All right, so before we start, you might be wondering, how do we set up our workspaces? So when we're creating a website, it's really helpful to download a text editor where you can write your HTML and CSS code. Text editors usually have really helpful features that make your life easier when you're coding. We're using Sublime Text today, which hopefully all of you guys have downloaded. And it's okay if you have some different text editors like Atom or the other things that we might have linked in the email. So first, we'll be starting off by creating a directory where we'll keep all of the files we're going to write and use today for our site. The directory is basically just a really fancy way of saying where a file is located on your computer, and it's basically like a folder. So to set up your workspace, you can follow along with us right at home. We're going to start by creating a file folder somewhere on your computer. So maybe on your desktop or wherever you'd like, and name it something like website, like you see on the screen. So to create a folder, usually you would kind of right-click, and then there should be an option to create a folder. Next, within this overarching website folder, we can create 3 more folders. One will be called Views, one will be called Styles, and the third will be called Assets. So we'll be storing all of our HTML content in the Views folder and all our CSS content in the Styles folder. And in the Assets folder, we'll have all of our sort of images or other visual content. So you can kind of refer to the screen, and that's basically how you want your folder structure to look. So hopefully you can kind of have an idea of how to get those folders set up. We're going to quickly go through the creation of your files and give you some time to get all of the workspace going. But to create a file, all you have to do is go onto your text editor like Sublime Text, and you can go and click on the new file in the file tab at the top, as seen on the screen. So all you have to do is, once you created that new file, you will save as and name the file index.html, like you see on the screen. So you have to make sure that you include the .html part, because this is how your computer knows that it's an HTML file. And make sure that the file is located in the Views folder of your site when you're doing the save as. And you kind of do the same thing with your styles.css file, and instead of having it in the views folder, you'll have it in the styles folder. So overall, you should have two files, the styles.css file and the index.html file. And the assets folder, you can have to add images to. So if you do have an image handy, like in JPG or PNG format, you can drag and drop it into the assets folder. But if you don't have one, that's totally okay as well. So we also, in our slides, we have a README file, and you'll see a README file in a lot of coding projects, but it's basically a file that describes your project and how to navigate it. We won't really go into a README for now, but you can read up on it. It's really important in coding projects. But yeah, so I know I went through a lot in the past few minutes, but we're going to give you a little bit of time to kind of organize your directory and set up your workspace right now. So if you have any questions at this time, please feel free to message the chat and let us know. We'll give you 2 minutes. So we're just going to move on to kind of having the getting a sense of how it all comes together. So let's start off with some starter code for your index.html file, just so we're able to see kind of what we have in that file and what things should look like. Our host should have posted the code that we have on the screen to the chat, so check it out there. If they haven't posted it, they will post it shortly. But essentially what you have to do is open the index.html file that you had made in Sublime Text and paste the code into the file. And then all you have to do is save, or you can save it by Control S, or there might be a save button, and then you'll be good to go. We'll give you a little bit of time to do that. I see that the code has just been sent to the chat. So just copy and paste that into your index.html file. All right, so when you open the file in the browser, what you can do, how you can do that is basically in your views folder, you can double click on the index.html file. So if you navigate to your views folder, double click, it should automatically open up in your default browser. Once you've done that, if you open the file in your browser, if it shows hello world, then you've set everything up correctly. So hopefully that shows up on your browser. Let us know if it doesn't. We might be able to help you with that. But don't worry if you don't understand any of this HTML stuff here that you've just copied. We're going to go through it in depth when we go into the HTML. So at this point, again, if you have any questions about setting up the workspace, any terms that we just mentioned, or anything at all, please feel free to direct message our host and they'll get back to you. So before going into the HTML, I want to go through a few general programming tips. This workshop is going to go through a lot of information fairly quickly, so if you have any questions, again, let us know. A note about programming and web development in real life is that even the most experienced and senior programmers search stuff up on Google daily. No one can memorize attributes of every single HTML tag or every rule for CSS, so the internet is truly one of the programmer's most important tools. Another thing to note is that readable, well-formatted code is really, really important. Indentation and proper formatting will save you so much trouble in the long run, especially if your code base gets really, really big. You'll thank yourself later in a few months when you're going through that code and you see this really well-formatted, nicely indented code. So lastly, we have some web development resources. W3 Schools is a really good resource for any HTML and CSS related content. And hopefully, I think our host has sent out some of these resources in the chat, so you can refer to them at any point if you need more information. It's a good idea to be comfortable with reading documentation for the language you're using. And documentation is basically a user guide that helps you with syntax and shows you how to use the different functions of a certain language. And it's really the programmer's best and most accurate tool.
Thanks, Shirley, for that really great intro. So now we're going to be going into the HTML lesson. So HTML elements, what are they? HTML code consists of a start tag and an end tag. So both start and end tags have to be surrounded by open and close angle brackets, which is what you see here. And end tags almost always have to have a / at the end of an open angle bracket. So each of these tag combos, as you can see here, the first one and the second one, are the formation of an element. So that's what they create here. Next, we're going to be talking about HTML tags. So HTML tags are hidden keywords that tell your browser how to format and display each element of your website. Each piece of content that you put on your website has to be inside a tag. So here you can see a few examples of tags. To start off, we need to have a few things in our empty HTML file. These are required so that our computer knows what we are working with. But thankfully, we already added these earlier when we were setting up our workspace, and I hope that you guys were able to add those too. But we're going to break down what each part of this code means and why we use this, why we use it. So firstly, we have a doc type declaration. So it might look like a tag, but it's not actually a tag. It just tells the computer what type of document to expect. In this case, we're saying that this is an HTML document. It always has to go at the very beginning of your document. So next, we need an HTML tag. This tells the computer where the HTML code starts and where it ends. And it ends with the HTML closing tag. So all of your code has to go between these two start and end HTML tags, otherwise it will not work. So then inside these tags, we can start writing our code. HTML documents are usually split up into a few different parts. So we have the head. So we have our open head tag here and our close head tag right here. And inside this, we have a bunch of important elements. So the first thing being a title. So this is actually the title that will show up at the top of your tab in any browser that you use. Next, we have a few other important elements that are actually not seen on your web page. And this is because the head tag usually contains metadata, which is data about data. And this gives the computer information about the web page and what to expect. So here in our code, we have the char set, and that basically is just computer speak for which version of ASCII characters that the web page is using. Next, we have the description. So this is basically used in search engines to index your site if you put it online. So you should write a description of what readers will find on your site. Feel free at this point to change your title or description if you want. So far everything that we've talked about was only located in the head tag. This, like we said earlier, was all the invisible information that will not show up on your web page when you click it and open it. Now we're going to move to the stuff that actually shows up, which is inside the body tag. So the body tag will contain all of the actual content of your site, and this part is seen by you and other viewers of your actual website. So a quick, really important note here, you must write everything that we're going to be doing today in the body tags so that everything shows up on the page. If you write your paragraphs or your headings or anything else in the head tag, it will not show up. So remember to keep everything in the body tag. Also, to write comments in HTML, which basically are very important little notes for programmers that explain different parts of your code. We write them like this, using an open angle bracket, exclamation point, and then 2 dashes, and then we close them like this, as you can see here. A really important thing to note is that you must always close your tags. So this includes all of the tags that we talked about today. The HTML one has a closing tag, the head tag has a closing tag, and the body tag has a closing tag. If you try to test out your site and it's not showing what you want, double check if you opened or closed your tags properly. Maybe you forgot a closing tag, but you forgot the / in your end tag, because that's actually a fairly common reason as to why maybe your code might not be working. So now let's talk about some commonly used tags. I know that this table might be a little bit overwhelming at first, but we're going to go through a few of them, and then we're going to have Shirley do a little bit of a demo. So heading tags, that's the first thing that we're going to be talking about today. So these are used to create headings where, just like in an essay, it distinguishes between the different sections of content. It is used as shown, where the number that is next to the letter H in the tag shows the level of the heading, which pretty much indicates its priority and its size. So it's very similar to how you would do this on a Word doc or a Google Doc, where you can have different sizes of headings. Next, we're going to talk about paragraph tags. So as it's pretty self-explanatory, they're used for paragraphs of text. These tags can be used in conjunction with line breaks when you want to put certain text on a different line. So as we can see here, this is the line break, and then when we add a line break, this part of it goes to the next line, and the next text goes to a different line. Finally, we're going to be talking about div tags. So these are container tags that are used to divide content. This is a really, really important tool to use when you're styling your pages, because you can divide it up into different sections that might all have the same font or same size or same background color or anything else. But the thing about divs is that they will not directly affect the visuals of your site. But it's just a really good way to group your content together. So for example, if you put your name in a heading and a paragraph about yourself, you could group both the heading and the paragraph together. So as you can see, we've used a div here. So we have some more tags in the slides which you can refer to, and we're going to give you a quick little demo in a little bit. But right now we want you to try it yourself. We want you guys to add your own heading using a heading tag and a description of yourself using the paragraph tag. So obviously we're making a website about ourselves, so let's add our name in the heading tag and a description. And we're going to give you guys 2 minutes to do that. Also, just a quick note, everybody, if you see that your website isn't working or whatever you wrote isn't showing up, remember to save your file before you open it. So that way your changes can refresh.
Oh, yeah. So about indenting, it's really good practice to indent because it makes your code a lot clearer to read, but technically it's not required. So even if one part isn't indented, it's totally okay, but you should still indent because it'll just look a lot nicer and it's a lot easier to read, but it won't affect whether the code works or not. All right, so don't worry if you are not finished or if you're struggling, because I am going to give a demo of the heading and the paragraph tags. So hopefully that will clear things up a little bit. So right here I have, as you can see, we have everything in from the beginning, and then I just commented out all of this text that we have for the heading and the paragraph tags. So as you can see from the get-go, I added a div container for the entire text section. We'll go over what this is, what this class attribute is a little bit later, but essentially this text section goes into who I am. So this is why it has the about me sort of title or value. I included the heading tags, and as you can see, I have a bunch of different heading tags, all with different priorities, like Shakula mentioned. So when we click on the index.html file, it should show a difference in the size of each of these headings because they're of different priorities. So also, as you can see, I have the paragraph tag, and I have some text within the paragraph tag and also a line break. And hopefully this text gives you a good idea of who I am. It's an introduction of myself, and hopefully yours looks similar, although obviously the content will be different. So I'm going to save all of this that I have here, and then I'm going to go to my directory and to the website folder, into the views subfolder, and then I'm going to click on the I have everything displayed in my browser. You can see the 3 different headings that I have with the different sizes and different priorities. You can see the paragraph that I have. And I also had a little fun fact at the bottom as well. So this is kind of what it'll look like and what that code basically does in your browser. So hopefully you have a good idea of the heading tags and the paragraph tags, and hopefully you've tried it out on your own as well and you saw something pop up on the browser. I'm going to do a quick demo of the image and the hyperlink tags that we kind of briefly mentioned before in the slides, but we didn't really go over. So I kind of have it commented out here, but just for ease of access, I'm just going to uncomment that. So essentially, we have in our image tag here and our hyperlink tag here, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what exactly these are. If you have any questions during this time, please feel free to direct your questions into the chat to our host, because I know it may be a little overwhelming at first. But essentially, we talked about how we want to have an image on our webpage, and that's exactly what this image tag does. So as you can see, I have my image, and then there's this source attribute. And an image tag doesn't need a closing tag like a lot of the other tags do. And it's one of the very few tags that doesn't need a closing tag. So the best way to put an image onto your site is to download the image and place it into the directory of your page. So essentially what's the thing in the quotations after the source is the file path of the image. So if you set everything up in your workspace, like we did at the very beginning, you'll have your assets folder, and then you may or may not have the PNG image in your assets folder. It's okay if you don't have an image readily available for you, because what's really cool about the image tag is that in the quotations here, you can also add a link to an image. So if you found an image on Google and it's a PNG, you can put the link in between these quotations and the image will still show up. So I believe that our host has sent out a link to an image. So if you don't have a PNG in your assets folder, then you can use that as a placeholder. We also have this alt, which means the alt text. And this is basically shown by your browser when the image either cannot be displayed or for those who screen readers to read web pages, who use screen readers to read web pages. This makes the internet more accessible for all, which is really important. As you can see, we have the image, which is our ada.png, and our alt text is Ada Lovelace. And a quick background on who Ada Lovelace is: she's one of the most influential figures in computer science, and she was regarded as the very first computer programmer. So I also want to go over briefly what a hyperlink is. A hyperlink, which many of you probably already know about, is something which creates a link to something else, whether it be a completely different site or even a web page of your own site, for example. You can put the address, the web address of the site after the href attribute here in double quotes. So basically, we'll talk about the attributes a little later, but just make sure that you have your web address in double quotes after this href equals. And then you can add some text in between these link tags, and this will basically be the text that shows up that you can click on, and it'll redirect you to this link. So basically, if I save this, we can kind of see what it should look like. If we go to our folder again, and then click on our index.html, as you can see, we have the Ada Lovelace photo, and also our GitHub link that we had. And if I click on this link, it directs us to GitHub. So that's basically the image tag and the href, the link tag. So hopefully you can get that working and add some images to your page. I'm going to give the control back to Shakula, and she'll talk a little bit about attributes, which I've been talking about but haven't really expanded on.
So we're going to be talking about attributes, as Shirley said. So each tag can have an attribute, which are basically special words used inside the start tag that provide your browser with even more information about how to display each element of your website. So for example, if you wanted to align a paragraph to the center, you could use align equals center, as we can see right here. There's a lot of different attributes out there, but there's a few common ones that are really important to know. So firstly, ID attributes. So this is used to identify a single unique element. This means that this means you could add it to a heading, for example, and give it a certain ID. You could add it to a whole div, or you can even add it to any other type of element that we've talked about previously. One thing to note about attributes is that syntax is very important. So we write the name of the attribute, which in this case is ID, and then we write an equal signs, and then between double quotes you have the value. So this is just what you're calling the ID. Next, we have class attributes. So these are attributes that can be added to a tag to identify a group of elements. So that's the main difference between ID and class, is that ID, you can only put it on one element, but class you can add to a bunch of different elements. So this, in the same way that I mentioned before, it can be added to div tags or paragraph tags or anything else. But the difference, like I said, is that if you were to put an ID on multiple elements in one file, it would not work. But with class, it works. Both of these are really helpful to when being used in conjunction with CSS if you want to be able to style an individual element or a group of elements. So when you group them, it makes it easier to style all elements at the same time. So for example, if you want your paragraph and your heading to have the same font or the same size or the same color, you can add a class so that all of those will change at the same time. Notice that all the attributes, like I said, syntax is very important. You have a name, and these are not random, you have to use the proper attribute that you're using. And our last two examples are the source and the href attributes, which are very important for linking sites and image file paths. So a quick question, do you guys see anything on your site so far that you can group together? If you do, you can answer in the chat. Maybe, for example, you could put your name, which you put in your heading, and your description. So basically all the text. Maybe you want to add those together in a class attribute. So if you want, you guys can go ahead and do that and add a class attribute under whatever name you want. We used about me. So let's add both of those using the class attribute. We'll give you 1 or 2 minutes to do that.
All right, so I'm just gonna give a quick demo of that and just kind of show you what it might look like. As you can see, I have several sections already grouped together. I have this div, which has a class attribute about me, and it has a bunch of text within it that's introducing me, which makes sense, as I mentioned before. I also have down here a heading tag with the ID attribute, and this ID attribute is, the value is facts, and this is unique, meaning that no other element can have this attribute. No other element can have the value facts. Also, class and ID are not the only attributes, as we've mentioned. You can see the images tag has the source attribute and the alt attribute. You can see that the hyperlink has the href attribute. And Lastly, I want to note that if you can see this div right here, I again have this class which has the about me value. And you can have several elements with the same class and the same class value, unlike IDs where you can only associate one ID with one element. Classes don't have this kind of restriction. And because this hyperlink that I have here, if I made this hyperlink my GitHub account, for example, it's used to showcase something about me. So that's why it's in the it has the about me class. So now that we've kind of explained that, and hopefully you have a better sense of the divs and the attributes that we have, let's just quickly revisit our page and see what it looks like so far. So if I go back, click the index.html, as you can see, adding the attributes and the divs and stuff haven't really impacted the look of the website so far, but there will be some differences when we go into the CSS portion. But as you can see, we have our headings, a heading for, a welcome, and also kind of the heading with our name. And we also have a little description in the paragraph tags that talk about us, that introduce us. And we have our images and even a hyperlink. So these are all characteristics that we've mentioned make up sort of a good introductory homepage. And hopefully you have something that looks similar to this right now. So I'm gonna give control back to Shakula. We're going to talk a little bit about just summing things up and wrapping up the HTML.
Thank you, Shirley. So now we're going to be wrapping the HTML up as Shirley said. So we finished the HTML basics, and hopefully now you are able to put your name as a heading, add a description of yourself, add a photo of you or something that describes you, any links to your social media, and anything else that you want to add. So just a few tips and hints. Try to divide your page using div tags. So that's what we mentioned earlier. Basically, they're just big content blocks, so you can group your page in a certain way. So obviously, as we said, refresh the page, make sure you're saving your file to see the changes if you ever are not able to see them. And in the future, once again, Google if you need to. It's probably your most important and best tool. And as we said earlier, if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat. We're here to help you, and we can answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to give it off to Shirley now, who's going to talk about CSS.
All right, thank you, Shakula. So as we talked about earlier, styling is typically associated with CSS. So if you think of HTML as the bones of your site, then CSS would be its skin and the clothes. Styling is usually done externally, so that means that there's a separate CSS file linked to the HTML file that you're working on. So what we have, and when you've been setting up the workspace and everything, we told you to create the styles.css file, and this is essentially that external file. We usually do this because we want to link multiple pages to the same CSS file so that all our pages on our site have the same type of styling, which means like maybe the same font for paragraphs, maybe the same background color, etc., to make things a little more uniform. So we're gonna do a quick mini exercise to set things up. We're going to connect the CSS file to the HTML file. So to do that, you put a link tag in the HTML code between the head tags, which looks like what you see on the screen. So our host should be sending this code into the chat, and all you have to do is open your index.html file, copy the code that our host sends out, and make sure that you put it in between the head tags of your index.html file. That's really important. So just to give a quick explanation of how to do, of what this code really means, basically, again, we have the href attribute, which you've seen before, but basically this contains the reference to the CSS file. This is the file path. So if you set everything up like we did at the very beginning, all you have to do is copy this, this file path. You don't have to change it in any way. So the /styles/styles.css is exactly how it should be if you set up your workspace like we did at the very beginning. Because now, once we add this into our head tags, that means that that we've linked the CSS file to our index.html file. And this means that we'll be able to change the look of the HTML that we had before. So if you weren't here at the very beginning, when we were setting up our workspace, our host or Shakula will be in the chat to help you with that. So next up, we're going to be looking into CSS rule sets. So CSS code is written with rule sets, which have basically two parts to them, a selector and a declaration. So basically what a selector is something that selects the HTML element that you want to style. To use the simplest form of a CSS selector, you write the name of the HTML element you want to style. So for example, in the slide that we have here, we want to select the heading with the priority, the #1 priority. So as you can see, we have the H1, and that's essentially the selector. When we have this selector, it refers to all of the H1 headings in the document. So once you select this H1 element and then do some styling with it, it'll change all of the H1 headings in your document. So just a quick note here that CSS is really the language of curly brackets, as you can see. And before we had HTML being the language of the angle brackets with the tags, but CSS it's really important to note that CSS is curly brackets. So, all right. Yeah, so I'm gonna go through what a declaration is, which is the second part of the rule set. So a declaration is written in between those curly brackets of the selector, and it basically describes the properties of our HTML element should have. Properties are basically a certain design aspect for the selected element, and properties have a name and an attribute. So for the code example on the screen that we have here, the property names are font style and color, while italic and the hex are the property values. So just to note, the hex that we have on the screen, which is basically that weird thing with the hashtag and the numbers and the letters, they're basically used to describe a certain color. They can be used to describe any type of color that you can possibly imagine. And you can Google hex colors if you want to see more about what they are. But basically, to summarize this, to insert a property into the declaration block, you write the property name, a colon, then the property value, and then finally a semicolon. So don't forget the semicolon, because this is really, really important, as it tells your computer that you're done with describing this property. If you forget the semicolon, the code will not work. It's really important to notice how the syntax, which is basically the grammar rules of programming of the code, is written. So computers are literally machines that don't think or interpret things the way we do. So we have to be extra careful with how we're writing our code, and make sure that we have these curly brackets and these colons and semicolons. And yeah, that's really, really important to note. So although we just went through CSS selectors and we just introduced it, there are a few different types of selectors that you can use depending on what type of grouping or what element you want to select. So we'll be talking about the simple selectors for now. Like we mentioned in the HTML section, elements can have a lot of different attributes, like the class or the ID. And these, along with a few other types, can be used to group elements with a certain rule set in CSS. So this is why we talked a lot about how it was important to group our HTML into divs and have the class and ID attributes, because it makes it a lot easier to style those particular sections. So it's really helpful if you want to change properties for perhaps only one element on the page, or maybe all the elements on the page, or maybe something in between. As you can see in the table on the screen, we select elements with a certain class by using a period and then the class name. And we select an element with a certain ID with a hashtag and the ID name. Or if we just want to select an HTML element, it's just whatever that element is. So like a paragraph or a heading or etc. So I'm going to go through a quick exercise where you can follow along with me on basically trying to use these selectors to style. So once I get my screen up. All right, so first off, we have, maybe we want to style our paragraph, which is what I have here in the comments. So I'm going to uncomment this. But essentially, let's just say that we want to style our paragraph and change the color of the text to blue and change the font size to 12. And basically how we would do that is use this paragraph selector and have our block where we have the property name and the value. So as you can see, we have the color and then a colon and blue, meaning that we want our paragraph text to be blue, and then our semicolon. And then we have our font size, colon, and then 12 px. Px is just pixels. So that's a standard kind of way of measuring the font size. But essentially, this whole thing will turn our paragraph blue and make the font size a little smaller. So definitely feel free to change the property values to anything that you might want, however you envision your paragraph to look, or what colors you want it to be. But I also kind of just want to go through using the ID selector, because I know that it's a little bit, it might be a little bit confusing without an example. So I don't know if you remember, but in my index.html file, I had a div and I had a heading with basically a fax ID. And basically what I had in this heading was that, fun fact, I like the color green. So what if we wanted to make it more visually appealing and actually make that heading green? What we can do is use this hashtag to select that particular heading with the ID name fax, and then change the color to green, like we do here with the properties. So this is essentially how you would select that particular heading with that ID of fax. So hopefully when I save this and then go to my file, okay, so I saved it, and then I'm going back to my views folder and to my index.html file. If I double click this, as you can see, the paragraph color is blue and it's a lot smaller, and we have our heading with our fun fact and it is green. So that's exactly what we wanted and exactly what we specified. So hopefully you have a good sense of these ID selectors and the class selectors. So now we're going to give you a little bit of time to try to group, try to style something that's grouped in an ID or a class selector. We'll give you 2 minutes to do that. And as always, feel free to ask us any questions in the chat. All right, fantastic. So hopefully you've made some progress with your styling and essentially grouping things together and styling that entire group of things. Remember, you can always click on the index.html file to see how everything looks. So that's a good way to kind of just see if you're doing things right. Just quickly revisiting the CSS properties. We've dealt with property examples that apply to text, but you can apply properties to a lot of different things, as you can see in the slide. There's the text properties, like we mentioned. We also have size and positioning properties, and also font properties. So we have all of these different names and value examples. So for text, you might want to change the text color, the line height, text align if you want to align your text in a certain box, text decoration for maybe if you want to underline it. And some value examples are like blue, red, different colors, 10 pixels, center, right, left, etc. And these are different names and values for your properties. So there's also maybe your size and positioning properties. So these are a lot, mostly used for like images or maybe tables. And then you can have your width and height and even padding. And there's also font properties, which hopefully you kind of played around with, which is like the font size, your font style, and font family. So just a quick note that these names and values are keywords, they're specific. So we've hopefully, we've sent out the CSS properties resources, and there's like a much larger guide on all of the different names and values that exist, because you can't just kind of create sort of your own name and expect the computer to understand whatever you wrote. It has to be a specific keyword, or like you see, the text align has a dash in between it. So these are some really important things to make note of. And if you think that if you're clicking on your index.html file and some of the styling isn't showing up, it might be because your name and your value properties just might not be correct, or might be, you might not have that dash or something like that. So that's something really important to note. All right, so we're going to move on to our second checkpoint. Hopefully now you should be able to kind of do a quick styling of your index.html page, pick some different font styles or colors, and manipulate the look of the text, and also group elements together and style them together using the selectors. So a quick tip is to see different sort of available colors that you are able to apply in your CSS file. You can search up CSS colors, and like I said before, there's a whole bunch of different colors, any color that you can really imagine, and they might be in hex, which is that weird hashtag and then letter number combo. And you can use those instead of the blue or the red keywords to color your text or anything else you might want to color. So again, if you have any questions so far, please send them in the chat. We're always here to answer questions, help you if you need any sort of assistance. So please feel free to send your questions to us. All right, so we're just going to go through a quick overview of what a typical CSS layout is like. This is something that you can really think about once you have a good idea of how your pages, how your page should look. So this is potentially after you have all of your HTML content, you might want to think about how you want to format that content. A web page is typically made of a few different parts. There's like the header, the menu, content, footer, and I'm sure that you've all seen a variation of this on the websites that you visit. On the screen here, we have a good visual of how websites are typically structured. So basically, we want to look at getting the layout right. And in CSS, we style our layouts using the div tags, and hopefully you're all really familiar with div tags now. Like we said earlier, div tags act as boxes, act as containers where you can store different content on your site. So in between your div tags, you can have a lot of different content that you might want to group together. For example, if you put all of your main content in one div while putting your heading content maybe in another div, then you can tell the computer to put these at the top, bottom, middle, or anywhere else you'd like on the web page using CSS layout. So for example, if you wanted to float your header to the top of your site and make it 100 pixels high, the code on the screen is how you would do it. These are definitely things that you can start thinking about when you have the content in your HTML down for page and sort of the general sort of CSS things for your styles file. But yeah, it's definitely something you might want to look into when you go into some more complex styling. All right. So with all of the HTML and CSS, we should have sort of a final product. We have all the basic elements that a page can have, and hopefully you've successfully created the skeleton and basic styles of the web page. So I'm going to kind of share how it looks. So as you can see, this is the quick demo of kind of what we did today with all of the code. So as you can see, we have all of the elements that we outlined at the beginning when we talked about a personal page. So obviously you can do some further styling with this to make it look a little bit nicer with the colors and everything. But we have the heading, the description, some pictures, etc. So I also wanted to kind of show you what a more thoroughly styled page might look like, and something that you can really do with HTML and CSS if you take some time to kind of go through the details. So I kind of prepared a little final site for all of you. This is something that after working on it for a little bit and maybe having a better understanding of everything that we've just mentioned, you can kind of create this type of page. So as you can see here, we have all of the elements kind of nicely centered on the page. So what I mentioned in kind of the layout slide. And we have our photo, a little description, some links to social media, and even some buttons for navigation. So this is definitely something you can make with more practice, a lot more Googling definitely, and a good understanding of HTML and CSS.
So thanks everybody for joining us today. We hope that you learned a ton and were able to make a wonderful personal website. You guys should be proud of yourselves. You guys took the time out of your day to learn a cool new skill. Now, don't worry if your site maybe isn't working right now or it looks a little bit wonky at the moment. Nobody's perfect the first time that they do something. And so that's why we're here to help you guys. So we're going to give you guys some time to work on it with our help if you need it. Another quick note is that Git is an important version control tool, which along with GitHub, which is an online platform that works with Git, is something that programmers use on the daily to facilitate coding work in large groups. It's a really excellent skill to know if you're serious about working in the development industry. PTC has created a cheat sheet for using with Git and GitHub, so if you want to check that out, it will be sent to everybody's emails in the next few days. Keep your eyes peeled for that. So we highly recommend going through it if you'd like to join us for PTC's next workshop. And actually about that, PTC is going to be hosting another HTML and CSS workshop later this month on May 28th. Clear your schedule for this one because it's going to be an art and coding crossover workshop. We're going to be exploring the power of HTML and CSS with the use of VR technology, all right in your browser. So definitely follow us on social media and check out our website for more information on this workshop. So now it's your turn. We're going to give you guys some free time until about 8:30 to personalize your website, add some more photos, write about your favorite interests, or even add something, a new spin on something that we've already worked on. If you feel like you're finished with the index HTML page, you can always create another page, an About Me page, a My Interest page, or anything else that you want. We've given you access today to the slides that we're using, so if you need to review them or go over a concept again on your own, you can. If you get stuck or need some help, don't hesitate to ask us for help by raising your hand or messaging us in the chat. We're able to go into breakout rooms with you one-on-one, so you can share your screen and show us your specific issue that you're having. So thank you guys for joining us.